the idea of avoiding an accident by whatever possible means. In skidding, we're going to be dealing with different types of skids: power skids, skidding on wet pavement, and we'll also be dealing with blowouts. So, Linda, you're going to be starting out this morning with evasive actions, aren't you?
Right. Evasive actions. Let's take a look at some evasive actions on the magnetic board here first. As Howard told you just a minute ago, what an evasive action is that it's a maneuver that you do to avoid someone else, and generally it's in an emergency type situation. So one of the things you have to really watch for is getting your wheels off of the actual pavement. This is what we call off-road recovery, and how do you get yourself out of this situation? Now, in off-road recovery, this is normally what happens. You'll be on the roadway, and for some reason you're pulling to the right, maybe to avoid an oncoming car. Your right wheels get off of the pavement, and then you need to get yourself back onto the roadway. So how do you go about doing that safely? Well, number one, you must have a firm grip on the wheel. Remember when we talked about the 10 and 2 and the 9 and 3 position? Have a firm 9 and 3 grip on the steering wheel, number one. Your wheels get off of the pavement. At this point, you should not be on the gas pedal or on the accelerator pedal. Okay, so you're off of the pavement, you are off of the gas at this point. Now, you have to get yourself back onto the roadway. So once you gain speed control, you've got control of your speed at this point, then you turn the steering wheel sharply to the left, get your wheels back onto the pavement, and then straighten out your wheels right away. Okay, but again, you have to first gain steering control, and then gain speed control, and then you'll get back to steering control again, getting yourself back onto the pavement. Now, let's take a quick look at a piece of film here that'll show us, again, in action, how to handle off-road recovery.
This driver escapes to the right to avoid a head-on, but now his wheels are off the pavement. He holds the wheel firmly to maintain control and pumps the brakes to reduce speed without skidding. With speed reduced, he steers sharply to the left, then right again to stay in his own lane. Just as in other emergencies, remember to keep your vehicle under control and quickly find a way out.
Okay, that shows it in action, how to handle an off-road recovery. Remember again, you must gain steering control first, get speed control, and then you'll get your steering control going back onto the roadway. Now, this would be a type of thing that would happen, let's say again, if you were trying to avoid some type of an accident up ahead, or the person up ahead, let's say, hits their brakes all of a sudden, and your only escape is to the right. You have to be aware that if those right wheels get off the pavement, this is how you want to handle off-road recovery. Now, when we talked back in previous lessons about the IPDE technique, remember in deciding you had several alternatives. Now, when you're adjusting your actual position on the road, you could either adjust your speed or your position. In adjusting your position, normally you only have two ways to go. You can either go to the right or to the left. What most people do, however, in an emergency situation, stop and think for a moment. What is it that most people naturally do? Most people naturally go for the brake. They panic and they hit that brake. And that is just not always the best maneuver to do in order to avoid something up ahead. So we're going to take a look at our actual three alternatives here. Escaping to the right, which we've also seen in off-road recovery here. Escaping to the left and hitting the brake and holding that steering wheel straight. You can do it, but again, it must be a carefully controlled action. Now, let's take a look first at a situation here on film and see how you would handle it.
Check your inside mirror.
That looks like kind of a scary situation there, but this does happen often. Now, you probably did not see that there was a vehicle in front of the truck. You're moving along the roadway here, and you pass another vehicle on the road, and then you come up behind the truck here. All of a sudden, the truck hits its brakes, but you don't see any vehicle in front of it. Maybe it's a little small VW up here. All you can see, and once we go back to the film again, all you will be able to see is just a slight shadow to tell you that there is a vehicle in front of that truck. Your only escape in this action, we also have an oncoming car in the left lane. So our lane to the left is blocked. In front of us, we're obviously too close to the truck. We can't hit the brakes and hold our steering wheel. So our only out is to the right, escape to the right in this situation. Okay, let's go back and look at this situation again and see how the driver handles it. He will escape to the right. Okay, now we just saw how the car escaped to the right, and you can tell it's a pretty scary situation. Actually, this is a situation where we really have not used our IPDE technique because we didn't identify the vehicle in front of the truck. But you do have to be able to react fast even in situations like this. Maybe you're a little asleep at the wheel and all of a sudden the truck hits its brakes. You must know where your escape route is. Now, that was one situation to the right, and often people will go to the right, and they'll forget about that escape route they do have to the left. Maybe there will be things blocking your escape to the right. Maybe it's parked cars, maybe it's pedestrians, maybe it's bushes, shrubs, so you have no escape to the right. Let's take a look at a possible situation where you may escape to the left. Now, this is a typical situation where your only escape is to the left. Let's take a look at that on the magnetic board. We're approaching a corner, and there's a series of vehicles in front of us here. Now, we can't see what's in front of the red vehicle up here. Maybe there's a bicyclist up here. From our position back here, we can see the pedestrians or the people standing here on the corner, maybe talking. We know we have a vehicle here in front of us. The vehicle in front of us, let's say, also has a right turn light on. So as the series of events happens, the red car turns, the yellow car gets up here, and we are right behind it. All of a sudden, for some reason, the red vehicle stops, which makes the yellow vehicle stop, which of course in turn we have to do something. Braking and holding, we're too close. It's obvious we're going to end up in a rear-end collision. We cannot escape to the right because of the people on the right. Our only escape in this particular situation would be to escape to the left. This way we will avoid, hopefully, any type of a collision here. Okay, let's see how they handle it in action now in that situation. Okay, so you saw how that is handled now in action, actually escaping to the left. So again, when you're out there on the roads and there are going to be things that you will not see. Again, you weren't able to see whatever reason the other vehicle stopped for. But you were aware of your escape, and you have to be able to react fast. That's why you keep your hands up on the wheel and you try and stay as alert as you can at all times. Now, let's take a look at another situation that's very typical. We're driving down the road here, and we've got parked cars on the right. We've got a stop sign here, crosswalk. We've got approaching traffic on the left. All of a sudden, we get up here near the parked car, and the guy decides to open his door. How do we handle that situation? Let's see this situation on film, in action. Okay, you can see it does happen very rapidly. All of a sudden, that door is open. What are you going to do? Where is your escape? Well, this is a situation, again, you cannot go to the left because of oncoming traffic. You cannot go to the right, obviously, because you've got the car right there with the door swinging open. What is your alternative? Well, this is where the typical reaction comes in. Your only alternative is to hit the brakes and hold that steering wheel straight. Now, the only problem with this is that you have to carefully control your braking action. Now, let's see how they resolve it again in the film, and we'll see how they control the braking action. You'll notice in this situation that not only were we able to control the whole situation, but we were also able to continue on with absolutely no conflict there at all. Nobody was injured, no cars hit or anything. Again, in this situation, though, you have to carefully control your braking action. If you just hit the brakes real hard, if your brakes are not in good condition, if your tires are not in good condition, this is a time when you will probably go into a skid, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes, how to control that. But again, control that braking action. Your foot goes down, but you release that pressure just a little bit. Your foot will go down a little harder and a little faster than in a normal braking situation, but again, you have to release some of the pressure on that brake. If you just panic brake and go down on it, then again, you're going to end up fishtailing or skidding, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. Now, we've talked about escape to the left, escape to the right, and brake and hold. These are generally your three alternatives in avoiding accidents or your evasive actions. Let's take a look at a situation and see how you would handle it. Okay, you'll notice our only escape there was an escape to the left. We had the hay truck on the right. We had the vehicle in front of us that we were a little close to. Our only escape was to the left. Now, let's take a look at another situation and try and see how you would handle this situation. In this situation, you'll notice that we had no escape to the left because of an oncoming car. Again, we were a little too close to the vehicle in front of us. Our only escape was to the right. Now let's take a look at one more situation and see how you would handle it. Now you notice this guy really popped out in front of you before you had any chance to do anything. You had no escape to the right because of the bridge railing on the right. You had no escape to the left because of the oncoming vehicle. And that guy jumped out in front of you. Your only alternative was to brake and hold that steering wheel straight. Now again, try to remember that braking and holding is not always the best action. If you can, look for an escape to the right or to the left. And if your wheels happen to go off the road, remember that off-road recovery procedure. Let your car slow down and then turn the wheel sharply onto the roadway. Okay, now we've talked a little about skids. Let's see how we do handle skids. Howard?
Okay, Linda, thank you. Before we actually get into taking a look at some of the examples, I think what we need to do is define our terms. Skidding is actually defined as to slip or slide either straight ahead or sideways. Now, we also want to, if we have a definition of skidding, then we should also have a definition of skid control, and that is the ability to control a car or your vehicle when it is skidding straight ahead or sideways. Now, there are basically two causes for skidding, and one of those, of course, would be an adjustment of speed or position. That is, for example, you either reduce or increase your speed too quickly, or you make a sharp change in direction too quickly. Also, an adjustment of speed or direction under conditions of poor traction. Now, for example, if you get off the paved edge of the roadway onto the soft shoulder and you attempt to make an abrupt stop, you could lose control of the vehicle and go into a sideways skid. Now, let's take a look at some types of skids. The first type is the braking skid. And an example of the braking skid is where you hit your brakes very, very hard in the event of an emergency. This is an example. Now, what is the proper response? That is, what should you do? Instead of hitting the brakes very, very sharply, you should, of course, hit the brakes, but gently, and continue to apply pressure and steer straight ahead. Now, you may have the ability to escape left or escape right, but probably not. Again, this is where the wheels are locked, so you want to immediately release the brake pedal and then reapply the brakes and hold the wheels straight. Also, of course, there is the example of a power skid, and that is generally where we have too much acceleration or over-acceleration on a slippery surface. For example, you may be making a right turn on a wet street and you over-accelerate, and what happens is the back end of your vehicle starts to slide out. The proper response would be, in the event that the back end does start to slide out, is to gently release pressure on the accelerator and, of course, steer in the direction that you are skidding. So, for example, if you are skidding to the left, which would be this way, you would start to steer into that direction in order to straighten out and hold the vehicle. Power skidding, of course, is an extremely dangerous situation and occurs on surfaces other than just wet surfaces. So we're now going to take a look at a short piece of film that demonstrates this idea of power skidding very well.
Do you realize the first emergency lesson that most students have is in their actual emergency? You'd think they'd be scared to death. Strangely enough, they feel they know exactly what they're doing. But they're dead wrong. You need to be trained and you need to have the experience to learn to get out of an emergency.
All right, you've just seen a real good example of a power skid and the way that the car is handled in overcoming the skid. Now let's take a look at a cornering skid. And if we'll take a look at our chart, you're going around a corner, or in this case a turn, and as you enter the turn, you jump on the brakes, and the vehicle starts to slide. Now, at this point, we want to know what should you have done. What you should have done is you should have started to brake before you entered the curve. That way you would have avoided this. But What can you do now to recover? The response at this point would be to come off the brakes, go back on the brakes gently, and steer in the direction that you want to go in order to recover. That would be, in this case, to the left, then, of course, coming out of your curve. So what you want to do is remember to brake before entering the curve, not once you have got into the curve. Now, let's take a look at a blowout skid. You're proceeding straight along, and you have a left rear blowout. The car is probably going to dip and start coming to the left. What would be the proper response? Well, many people will jump on the brakes and they will steer in the opposite direction, which will cause this to happen. It will cause the vehicle to rotate and start to slide. It may also cause this to happen. The vehicle to come back in the direction in which it was coming from and meeting oncoming traffic. So let's take a look at the proper response. The proper response, you have a left rear blowout, you start to skid, you steer into the direction of the skid, which will cause the back end to whip around, and then, of course, pull over and come off the paved edge of the roadway or pull as far to the right as you possibly can. Now, in a front wheel blowout, you have loss of directional control. That is, the ability to steer the vehicle is far more difficult. So the proper response would be to apply the brakes and hold the steering wheel straight. Hold the steering wheel straight and apply the brakes gently. That is, do not jump on them. Do not throw the vehicle into a skid. Now, we're going to take a look at counter skids. And counter skids are defined as after you have started to skid and corrected, the vehicle then starts to skid into the opposite direction, and you then have to recover from that direction. Now, let's take a look at how a counter skid works. You will notice that we are making a right turn, and of course, as we start to make our turn, the rear end starts to slide left. Now, it could be because of the fact of oversteering. Maybe our turn was too tight. Perhaps, on the other hand, maybe we hit a wet surface, and our rear end is starting to skid left. So what do we do in order to correct? Well, we just discussed the idea that in order to correct a skid, in many conditions, you steer into the direction of the skid. So what we do is we steer left, causing the rear end to whip back, which, of course, will end up by setting us into a straight position. Now, without realizing it, we may again hit another surface. Perhaps maybe we have hit some substance. It might be oil. It might be water. Maybe there was a dip in the road that we didn't recognize, and the vehicle starts to slide again. It starts to fishtail. That is, the rear end going back and forth, like a tail of a fish, actually sideways movement. Only in this case, the rear end of the vehicle starts to slide right. So in order to correct this, what we need to do is to steer into the direction of the skid. That is, in this case, we're going to turn right since the vehicle is skidding right, which causes the back end, again, to whip around, and therefore the vehicle is straightened out. Now, again, notice that if this were just a normal skid, what would happen? We would make our turn, the vehicle would skid to the left, we would steer left and straighten out. But we have an additional problem. That is, the vehicle now starts to skid into the opposite direction. The rear end starts to brake to the right. It starts fishtailing, this sidewards motion of the rear end. And of course, it can be difficult to control. Remember that whenever you fishtail, or in the type of skid that we are looking at now, the ideal situation is to steer into the direction of the skid. Do not jump on your brakes. If you jump on your brakes, you might bring yourself around the opposite direction and start the rotating motion. So again, we've steered to the right, the vehicle straightens out, and we're fine. Now, one thing to remember is keep hold of the steering wheel, keep a firm grip on it, don't tighten up, and whatever you do, stay off of the brakes, don't jump on them. Okay, now, Linda, we've covered an awful lot of material in this lesson. You're going to put it all together for us, right?
Right. Okay, now in this lesson we've talked about evasive actions. In other words, what can you do? What are your alternatives in order to avoid a hazardous situation in front of you? Remember, you can escape to the right, you can escape to the left, or you can brake and hold that steering wheel straight. Now, in your escape to the right, if your wheels happen to get off of the road, you'll have to go through off-road recovery procedures. Remember again, which is basically the same. You've got to get control of that steering wheel first and then get speed control. Generally, you get speed control by coming off of the gas, and sometimes you will have to go for the brake. Get steering control and then speed control. Now, what should happen if you do hit the brake a little hard and you happen to go into a skid? We've talked about different types of skids. Again, you want to get steering control and speed control. But again, keep a firm grip on that steering wheel. Okay, that's it for this lesson. Howard, you want to give us the activity?
All right, Linda. Today, in this lesson, we have 2 activities. First of all, we'd like you to list 4 evasive actions to avoid a potential hazard. List 4 evasive actions to avoid a potential hazard. Secondly, we want you to list 4 types of skids and give an example of each. List 4 types of skids and give an example of each. Well, that about concludes this lesson, and we'll be looking forward to seeing you on our next lesson. Bye.
Bye.
For complete